If you've arrived here at the end of a long day, looking for something calm to ease you into rest, you're welcome to stay. Let your mind settle. Let the day's concerns fade for a while. Tonight, we're going to explore something both ordinary and invisible. Something happening right now in parking lots and side streets across cold regions as temperatures drop and darkness comes early. We're looking at how people survive freezing winter nights when their shelter is a vehicle, when there is no heater, when the temperature outside falls to 20 degrees or 10 or lower. When sleep must happen anyway because morning still comes and the body needs whatever rest can be found. This is not about dramatic rescue or crisis intervention. This is about the quiet, practical knowledge required to make it through one cold night, then another, then a winter's worth of nights, each one demanding the same careful preparation, the same calculated choices about warmth and safety and rest. It's a form of survival that happens largely unseen, guided by techniques shared quietly between those who need them. Methods developed through necessity and refined through repetition. An entire system of knowledge about heat retention, moisture management, and the transformation of a vehicle into something that might, with enough preparation, become a place where sleep is possible. So, settle in. Let the information come slowly, one detail at a time. We'll move through the evening routine, the long, cold hours of darkness, and the particular challenges that emerge when metal and glass become the only barrier between a human body and winter air. The preparation begins in that golden hour before sunset, when light still remains, but the temperature has already begun its evening drop. This timing matters. Working inside an illuminated vehicle after dark draws attention. A dome light visible through windows, movement inside a parked car, these things register in the awareness of security patrols, police, passers-by. So the winterization happens while day transitions to dusk, completed before full darkness settles. The first decision was made hours earlier, where to park. This location represents a series of calculations that experienced vehicle dwellers make instinctively, weighing factors that might not occur to someone who has never needed this knowledge. Safety stands as the primary concern, not just personal safety, though that matters tremendously. Also, the safety of remaining undisturbed through the night. Some locations tolerate overnight parking, others do not. Learning which is which comes through experience, through community knowledge shared between vehicle dwellers, through careful observation of patterns. Walmart parking lots appear frequently in these discussions, though the reality is more complicated than the simplified doctrine suggests. Some locations explicitly allow it. Others have banned the practice. The actual policy varies by municipal ordinance and individual store management. What remains consistent is the logic. A large parking lot, 24-hour operation, enough vehicle turnover that one car doesn't stand out. Truck stops serve similar functions. So do hospital parking areas, though these carry their own risks. Some choose residential streets, parking legally where an older sedan simply looks like it belongs to someone visiting. The art lies in achieving invisibility through ordinariness. The vehicle's position matters as much as its location. Facing away from streetlights reduces interior illumination that might show through gaps in window coverings. Parking on a slight incline, nose down if possible, helps condensation drain away from sleeping areas. Avoiding direct wind exposure makes a measurable difference in how quickly the interior loses heat through the night. Proximity to facilities enters the calculation. A 24-hour gas station or fast food restaurant means access to restrooms, to warmth if emergency requires it, to a legitimate reason for presence in the area. These considerations layer on top of each other, creating a mental map of viable locations that shifts with weather, day of week, and season. Once positioned, the transformation begins. The vehicle must shift from transportation to shelter, from public to private, from mobile to stationary. This transformation is physical and psychological both. Window coverings go up first. These serve multiple purposes simultaneously. They provide privacy, turning transparent glass into opaque barrier. They add a layer of insulation between interior warmth and exterior cold. They prevent the visibility of interior condensation, which would otherwise announce someone's presence to anyone walking past. The materials vary. Purpose-made insulated window covers exist, sold to vehicle dwellers and van conversion enthusiasts. Reflectix, the foil-faced bubble wrap sold as residential insulation, appears frequently, cut to fit each window's dimensions exactly. Some use rigid foam board, others dark fabric, others cardboard covered with emergency blankets. What matters is coverage and fit. Gaps let heat escape and allow outside eyes to see in. The installation must be quick and appear casual from outside. Interior suction cups, static cling, careful wedging into window frames. The goal is a vehicle that looks closed up, perhaps with sunshades visible, nothing to distinguish it from any other parked car whose owner simply wanted privacy. Inside, the sleeping platform takes shape. In a sedan, this might be the reclined front seats or the cleared back seat. In an SUV or van, it could be a constructed platform over folded seats, creating a flat surface that keeps the sleeper off the metal floor. In a truck with a covered bed, the arrangement happens in that sheltered space. Each vehicle type presents different possibilities and constraints. Bedding comes out from storage, the sleeping bag rated for cold temperatures, the extra blankets, the foam pad or air mattress that provides crucial insulation from below. These are arranged in the order they will be used, creating the sleep system that will matter so much once true cold arrives in the night's darkest hours. Everything needed for the night must be within reach before settling in. Water bottles, though these must be kept from freezing. Food that doesn't require preparation. Medications, the headlamp or flashlight. The portable urinal or bottle that might prevent the need to leave warmth in the middle of the night. Anything forgotten now means leaving the sleeping bag later, breaking the seal of accumulated body heat, letting precious warmth escape. This is the last time movement inside the vehicle can happen freely. Once full darkness arrives, once the sleeping bag is zipped and the body settles into position, the vehicle becomes still. Movement attracts attention. A rocking car draws eyes. So everything required must be arranged now. The temperature continues falling. The light fades. The body knows what's coming. The ritual of preparation provides structure, control over at least these small decisions. Window by window, the vehicle becomes a shelter. Hour by hour, day becomes night. The physics are simple and unforgiving. A human body at rest produces roughly 100 watts of heat. A vehicle interior in winter contains approximately 200 cubic feet of air bounded by metal and glass surfaces that freely conduct heat to the outside. Without insulation, without deliberate design, that warmth dissipates into the winter night almost as fast as the body can produce it. So everything depends on building a thermal envelope, a zone within the vehicle where warmth can accumulate and persist, not the entire interior. That space is too large. The body's heat production cannot maintain it. Instead, the goal is a smaller defended space, a cocoon inside a car. This is why window covering matters beyond privacy. Glass conducts heat readily. A square foot of uncovered window in 20-degree weather pulls warmth from the interior continuously, creating a cold zone that expands inward. Cover that glass with foam board, reflectics, even heavy fabric, and the heat loss slows. The mathematics are straightforward. Every surface that separates warm interior air from cold exterior must carry insulation. The windows receive attention first because they represent the most vulnerable surfaces, but the floor matters almost as much. Metal conducts heat efficiently. A person sleeping directly on a vehicle's floor loses warmth through conduction constantly. Even carpeting provides minimal insulation against this transfer. This is why experienced vehicle dwellers construct platforms, use foam pads, layer cardboard beneath sleeping bags. The goal is dead air space between body and metal. Air insulates. Still air insulates well, so foam pads create thousands of tiny air pockets. Folded blankets trap air between layers. Even cardboard, corrugated and cheap, provides its insulation through the air channels in its structure. The sleeping bag itself represents the primary defense. Not just any sleeping bag, but specifically one rated for temperatures well below what the forecast predicts. The rating system assumes the sleeper is using an insulated pad beneath them. It assumes the surrounding air is merely cold, not continuously chilled by contact with freezing metal surfaces. It assumes a tent at minimum. A vehicle provides some shelter, but it also conducts cold inward actively. Cold weather sleeping bags function through loft. Down or synthetic insulation creates thickness that traps air. The sleeper's body warms that trapped air, which then surrounds them in a maintained warmth zone. Compression destroys this loft, collapses the air spaces, eliminates the insulation. This matters intensely for whatever the sleeper lies upon. Weight compresses the bottom of the sleeping bag, reducing its effectiveness precisely where the cold surface conducts heat away most efficiently. This is the reason for the pad beneath. It maintains insulation where compression would otherwise eliminate it. Some vehicle dwellers add sleeping bags together, one inside another, creating additional loft. Others supplement a primary bag with blankets layered outside it. The principle remains consistent: trap air, maintain loft, create separation between warmth and cold. The choice of where to sleep within the vehicle reflects thermal logic. The back seat sits lower than windows, reducing exposure to glass surfaces. The front seats recline, but place the sleeper's head near windshield, the largest single glass surface. A platform built over folded rear seats elevates the sleeper away from the floor, away from the coldest air that settles at the vehicle's lowest point. Warm air rises, cold air sinks. This basic convection creates stratification. The air 6 inches off the floor may be 5 or 10 degrees colder than air at head height. In a desperately cold vehicle, those degrees matter. Some block off portions of the vehicle entirely, hanging blankets or installing barriers that reduce the volume of space their body heat must maintain. A smaller space warms faster and retains heat better. The calculation is direct. If the entire vehicle interior cannot be kept survivably warm, defend a portion of it absolutely. Ventilation complicates everything. It must happen. Without it, moisture from breathing and perspiration accumulates, condenses, saturates insulation, creates wetness that conducts heat away from the body. But ventilation means cracking windows, allowing cold air in, losing warm air out. The balance required is precise and counterintuitive. Too little ventilation breeds dangerous condensation. Too much ventilation makes warmth impossible to maintain. Most crack two windows on opposite sides of the vehicle, creating cross-ventilation that moves moisture out without creating a direct draft across the sleeping position. An inch of opening, sometimes less. Enough that air exchanges slowly, but moisture doesn't accumulate. Not so much that the interior temperature plunges. Insulated window coverings must accommodate this crack, must maintain their seal and function despite the gap. Some cut small vent holes deliberately, others simply leave a portion unsealed at the top, where warm, moist air naturally rises. The thermal envelope, once constructed, becomes the architecture of the night. It is not warm in the way a heated home is warm. It is survivable. It allows sleep to be possible. It creates a zone where body heat can accumulate enough that rest might come. That morning can be reached without danger. This construction happens every evening. It becomes ritual, routine, a practiced sequence of actions that transforms vehicle into shelter. The knowledge of how to build it, which materials work, which compromises must be made. This knowledge passes between vehicle dwellers as survival information, tested and refined through the experience of cold nights endured. The human body at rest produces roughly the same heat output as a 100-watt light bulb, not much. In a vehicle without heat, parked in temperatures well below freezing, this modest warmth becomes the only furnace available. Everything that follows, every material choice, every layer, every adjustment through the night, serves a single purpose, containing that small flame of metabolic heat long enough to survive until morning. The physics are simple. The application is not. A body left exposed to freezing air loses heat faster than it can produce it. Core temperature drops, shivering begins, the body's attempt to generate more warmth through muscle activity. But shivering prevents sleep, burns precious calories, and cannot be sustained indefinitely. The goal, then, is to trap body heat in layers of insulation, creating a microclimate warm enough that the body can maintain temperature without distress. The winter-rated sleeping bag appears in nearly every account of successful vehicle survival. Rated to 0 degrees Fahrenheit or below, these bags use either synthetic insulation or downfill to create thousands of tiny air pockets. Dead air, still air, air warmed by the body and held in place by the surrounding material. This is not the sleeping bag generating heat. This is the sleeping bag preventing heat from escaping. Many experienced vehicle dwellers use a method sometimes called the burrito wrap. The process begins with a thermal base layer worn against the skin, moisture-wicking synthetic fabric or merino wool that pulls sweat away from the body. Over this, insulating middle layers, fleece, additional long underwear, sometimes a lightweight puffy jacket. Then into the sleeping bag, fully zipped. Over the sleeping bag, another layer, a blanket, a second sleeping bag rated for milder temperatures, or an emergency bivy sack made of reflective material. Only the face remains exposed, and even that opening can be partially covered with a balaclava or scarf arranged to allow breathing. The result is a series of nested shells, each trapping its own layer of warmed air. The body heats the innermost layer. That warmth radiates outward, but is slowed by each successive barrier. By the time it reaches the outermost surface, the temperature gradient has been stretched across multiple insulating zones. This works, but only if the layers remain dry. Moisture is heat's enemy. Water conducts heat away from the body far more efficiently than air. A damp sleeping bag loses much of its insulating value as the tiny air pockets fill with condensation. Wet clothes against the skin create a continuous evaporative cooling effect, drawing warmth away even as the body struggles to maintain temperature. This is why the base layer must wick moisture, why sleeping clothes must be kept separate from clothing worn during the day, why anything damp is considered a serious liability. Some vehicle dwellers elevate their sleeping surface to escape the coldest zone. Car floors are metal. Metal conducts cold directly into whatever touches it. Sleeping on the floor means sleeping on a surface that draws heat downward continuously. The solution: foam camping pads, folded cardboard, or small wooden platforms that create an air gap between body and metal. Even an inch of separation makes a measurable difference. The coldest air in the vehicle sinks and pools at floor level, and lifting the sleeping area above that layer means sleeping in air several degrees warmer. Loose layers work better than tight ones. Compression destroys insulation by collapsing those crucial air pockets. A puffy jacket squeezed tight against the body provides less warmth than the same jacket worn loose. This principle extends to the sleeping bag itself. Crawling inside and cinching it snug around the body seems intuitive, but leaving some interior space allows a larger volume of air to be warmed and trapped. Extremities present their own challenge. Hands, feet, and head lose heat disproportionately because of high surface area and thinner tissue. A person can be adequately insulated at the core while fingers and toes approach frostbite. The head, in particular, radiates significant heat. Old estimates claiming half of body heat is lost through the head are exaggerated, but the loss is real enough that a warm hat becomes essential equipment. Many sleep in knit hats, hoods pulled up, or even balaclavas that cover everything but eyes and mouth. Feet require dry socks, sometimes layered, sometimes enclosed in additional insulation like down booties or wrapped in a spare jacket. Hands can be tucked inside the sleeping bag, close to the torso where warmth concentrates, or covered with gloves if they must remain outside for adjusting layers during the night. The vehicle itself provides the first and most important layer of protection: shelter from wind. A sleeping bag rated to 0 degrees performs according to that rating only in still air. Wind strips away the warm boundary layer surrounding the fabric, forcing the insulation to work harder. Inside a vehicle, even one with drafts and gaps, the wind is blocked. This alone can mean the difference between a sleeping bag that keeps someone alive and one that does not. Windows and doors leak cold. Glass conducts heat outward. Gaps around seals allow freezing air to seep inside. This is where improvised insulation comes into play. Reflectix, a material made of bubble wrap sandwiched between reflective foil, appears frequently in vehicle dweller setups. Cut to fit each window, it blocks drafts and reflects radiant heat back into the interior, Some attach it with suction cups, others wedge it into window frames. The effect is double. The air bubbles insulate, and the reflective surface bounces infrared radiation back toward the source of warmth. Cardboard works, foam board works, even layers of newspaper or emergency blankets taped across windows reduce heat loss. These materials are not elegant, but they are accessible and functional. A vehicle lined with window insulation becomes a more effective container for the small amount of heat a human body produces. The temperature inside an insulated vehicle parked in freezing conditions will still drop far below comfortable. It will not be warm, but it may be survivable. The difference between 10 degrees Fahrenheit and 25 degrees Fahrenheit is the difference between a brutal night and a dangerous one. The cold is tactile. Breath becomes visible, clouding in the dim interior. Exhaled moisture hangs in the air before settling on every surface. Sleeping bag fabric feels stiff where condensation has frozen along the outer shell. Metal surfaces inside the vehicle, seatbelt buckles, door handles, window cranks, become painful to touch with bare skin. The body, wrapped in its layers, occupies a small warm zone inside this larger cold space. The edge of that zone is sharply defined. Face exposed to the air feels the cold immediately. Hands outside the sleeping bag grow numb within minutes, but inside the insulated cocoon, warmth holds. Not comfort, not the warmth of a heated room, but enough, just enough. This is the architecture of survival. Body heat as foundation, insulation as walls, and the vehicle as roof. Modest materials arranged with care, creating a space measured in degrees and inches where sleep might be possible and morning might be reached. The transformation of a vehicle into shelter begins with covering the windows, not for privacy, though that matters, not primarily for darkness, though that helps. The windows are covered because glass is a thief. Glass conducts heat outward. A single-pane car window offers almost no insulating value. Warmth generated inside the vehicle, whether from a human body or a temporary heat source, radiates through the glass and disappears into the frozen night. Infrared energy passes through as if the window were barely there. The result is a continuous thermal drain, pulling heat away from the interior at a rate that makes warmth almost impossible to maintain. The solution is to create barriers. Materials placed against the windows serve two functions. They block the conductive transfer of heat through the glass, and they provide privacy that allows a person to sleep without being immediately visible to anyone passing by. Reflectix appears more often than any other material in accounts of vehicle dwelling. It is a commercial insulation product, bubble wrap laminated between two layers of aluminum foil. The air bubbles provide insulation. The foil reflects radiant heat back toward the source. A piece of Reflectix cut to fit a car window and wedged into place can reduce heat loss noticeably. Enough that the interior temperature climbs several degrees, even with no active heat source. The installation is simple. Measurements are taken for each window. Sections of Reflectix are cut slightly larger than the window dimensions. Some people use suction cups attached to the foil side to hold the material in place. Others cut the pieces large enough that friction alone keeps them wedged into the window frame. Rear windows, side windows, windshield, every piece of glass gets covered, transforming the vehicle into an enclosed capsule. Cardboard works when Reflectix is not available. Flattened boxes, cut to size, fitted into window frames. The corrugated structure of cardboard traps air in its channels, providing modest insulation. It costs nothing if salvaged from dumpsters or loading docks. It blocks visibility completely. And while it does not reflect heat the way foil does, it still reduces conductive loss enough to matter. Foam board insulation, the rigid pink or blue panels sold at hardware stores, offers better insulating value than cardboard. Thicker sections trap more air. The material is lightweight, easy to cut, and can be fitted precisely into window openings. Some vehicle dwellers build complete window insert sets from foam board, cutting each piece to match the exact dimensions of every window, then installing and removing them each night and morning. Emergency blankets, thin sheets of mylar with a reflective coating, are folded or taped across windows. They provide minimal insulation but maximum heat reflection. The metallicized surface bounces infrared radiation back into the vehicle interior, functioning like a mirror for heat. They are cheap, compact, and multi-purpose, also used as an outer layer over sleeping bags or as ground insulation. Even newspaper works in desperate circumstances. Layers of newsprint taped across windows trap air between the sheets and block some heat transfer. It is the least effective option, but it is also the most accessible, free, available in any town, requires only tape to install. The effect of covering the windows is immediate and measurable. A vehicle with bare glass in freezing temperatures will equalize with the outside air within an hour. A vehicle with insulated windows holds heat longer, dropping in temperature more slowly, maintaining an interior climate that is still cold, but noticeably less brutal. The floor receives similar treatment. Metal conducts cold upward from the frozen ground beneath the vehicle. Anyone sleeping on the floor without insulation loses body heat directly into the metal through conduction. The cold is specific and localized. Hips, shoulders, any point of contact becomes a transfer zone where warmth drains away. Foam camping pads provide the first layer of defense. Closed cell foam, the dense material used for sleeping pads, does not compress easily and maintains its insulating air pockets, even under body weight. A pad rated for winter camping can have an R value of 4 or higher, meaning it resists heat flow enough to keep a sleeping person insulated from frozen ground. Inside a vehicle, the same pad serves the same purpose, placed between body and metal floor. Some use multiple layers, cardboard on the bottom, then a foam pad, then a blanket or additional padding. The principle is the same as the layered clothing strategy. Each layer traps air. Each air gap slows heat transfer. The cumulative effect is a sleeping surface that does not actively pull warmth from the body. Wooden platforms built to fit the specific interior dimensions of a vehicle elevate the sleeping area several inches above the floor. The air gap itself becomes insulation as cold air sinks and pools below the platform, while the sleeping surface remains in a slightly warmer zone. These platforms are more common in vans or larger vehicles where the space and effort required for construction makes sense. In sedans, elevation comes from stacking softer materials, folded blankets, couch cushions, anything that lifts the body above direct contact with the metal. The windows, once covered, create near total darkness inside the vehicle. This is intentional. Darkness signals privacy. A car with uncovered windows and a person visible inside attracts attention. A car with covered windows looks unoccupied, or at least gives no clear indication that someone is sleeping inside. The coverings make the vehicle anonymous, but they also trap moisture. Every breath exhaled adds water vapor to the air. Perspiration, even minimal perspiration from a person sleeping in cold conditions, adds more. With the windows sealed by insulation, that moisture has nowhere to go. It accumulates. And as interior surfaces cool toward the outside temperature, the moisture condenses. This is the trade-off embedded in insulation. Covering the windows keeps heat inside, but also keeps moisture inside. The moisture will condense. Ice will form. Managing this is a separate challenge, addressed through ventilation, but the insulation itself creates the problem, even as it solves the cold. The vehicle, lined with reflective surfaces and foam barriers, becomes a hybrid space, part car, part improvised shelter. The materials are visible and functional, nothing decorative about them. Reflectix crinkles when touched, foam board is rigid and awkward, cardboard sags slightly in the corners. These are not elegant solutions, they are pragmatic ones. The person who installs these barriers is creating a shell within a shell. The car's metal body provides the first layer of protection from wind and precipitation. The insulation adds a second layer, tightening the thermal envelope, reducing the volume of air that must be kept warm, reflecting heat inward, blocking drafts. Together, the covered windows and insulated floor transform the vehicle from a mobile space into a stationary one, from transportation into habitat. The car no longer looks like a car from the inside. It looks like a small, dim room with soft walls and a low ceiling, every surface lined with improvised material, every opening sealed. This is the barrier. This is the line drawn against the cold. Not a defense that eliminates the threat, but one that reduces it enough to make survival possible. The layers worn into a sleeping bag at night determine whether sleep comes at all. This is not the simple mathematics of more equals warmer. The body sleeping in a freezing vehicle requires a different equation entirely, one where compression, moisture, and circulation matter as much as raw insulation value. Too many clothes trap the body in a failing system. Tight layers press against skin and compress the fabric meant to hold warm air. That compression eliminates the dead air spaces that create actual warmth. A person wearing 3 pairs of socks may find their feet colder than with one loose pair, because the pressure restricts blood flow to extremities already threatened by cold. The same principle applies to tight thermal underwear beneath sweatpants beneath another layer. Each addition reduces the insulation value of what lies beneath it. Experienced vehicle dwellers speak of the learning curve with clothing. The first nights involve climbing into the sleeping bag, fully dressed in every piece of clothing owned. The body stays cold. The clothing grows damp from perspiration that has nowhere to escape. Morning brings the realization that wet clothes in a freezing vehicle will not dry, and that the next night begins with compromised insulation. The adjustment comes slowly. Fewer layers, looser fit, careful selection of what touches skin and what creates airspace. Loose, dry layers form the foundation. A base layer against skin should wick moisture rather than trap it. Synthetic materials or merino wool rather than cotton, which holds water and pulls heat from the body as it sits wet against skin. Over this, a loose middle layer creates the airspace that actually insulates. Then the sleeping bag itself, which works only if the layers beneath it remain dry and allow the bag's insulation to loft properly. But 3 parts of the body demand special attention regardless of what covers the torso. the head, the hands, the feet. These extremities lose heat disproportionately and suffer cold's effects most immediately. A winter hat becomes non-negotiable equipment. The body loses significant heat through the head, and that loss accelerates in freezing temperatures. Sleeping without head coverage means the body works continuously to replace warmth flowing out through the scalp, pulling resources from the core and leaving less capacity to keep fingers and toes viable. A simple knit hat, a hood from a sweatshirt, even a towel wrapped around the head, anything that traps the heat radiating from the scalp makes the entire system more efficient. Hands present their own problem. Gloves seem like an obvious solution, but sleeping in gloves means waking to use a phone, adjust layers, or manage any nighttime need becomes an awkward struggle with covered fingers. Some choose fingerless gloves or keep hands inside the sleeping bag near the body's core. Others tuck hands into armpits or between thighs, using the body's warmest zones to protect its most vulnerable parts. There is no perfect answer, only a series of small compromises repeated each time cold wakes the sleeper. Feet suffer most. Blood flow reaches them last. They rest furthest from the core's heat. They often press against the vehicle's cold floor or metal surfaces, even through the sleeping bag material. Socks become critical infrastructure. The choice of socks follows the same principle as all other layers: loose, dry, insulating. Wool socks, the thick, soft kind meant for winter hiking, create warmth without compression. A single pair of quality wool socks outperforms 3 pairs of thin cotton socks, because the wool traps air and wicks moisture, while the cotton compresses and grows damp. Some vehicle dwellers keep a dedicated pair of sleeping socks, worn only at night, stored in a sealed bag during the day to ensure they stay dry. Those socks enter the sleeping bag warm and moisture-free, giving feet their best chance of staying functional through the night. The temperature of clothing when it enters the sleeping bag matters as much as the clothing itself. Fabric that sits in a freezing vehicle all day becomes cold to the touch. Putting on a frozen sweatshirt means the body must first warm the fabric before that fabric can contribute any insulation, an expenditure of energy and heat when both are scarce. Some keep their sleep layers inside the sleeping bag during the day so the clothing stays warmer than the ambient air. Others warm clothing against their body before fully settling in for the night, or keep particular pieces in an inner pocket where body heat maintains a higher temperature. But even with perfect layering, the body generates moisture. Breathing, perspiration from the night's small movements, the simple fact of a warm body in a cold space. That moisture must go somewhere. If it soaks into clothing, the clothing becomes a liability. The wet fabric conducts heat away from skin. The evaporation of that moisture pulls more heat continuously. Morning arrives with damp clothes and a colder body, and the clothing will not dry in the freezing vehicle during the day. This creates a secondary rule. The sleeping bag must breathe, and layers inside it must allow moisture to escape. A sleeping bag rated for extreme cold but fully sealed traps moisture inside. The body wakes damp. Some crack the bag's zipper slightly despite the cold, allowing moisture-laden air to escape and drier air to enter. Others use sleeping bags designed with breathable fabrics that permit moisture transmission while blocking heat loss. The compromise between staying warm and staying dry defines every hour of sleep. Certain items of clothing prove worse than useless in overnight cold. Jeans, beloved during the day for their durability, become cold, stiff constraints at night. Denim offers almost no insulation. It restricts movement. It holds moisture. Sleeping in jeans means waking colder than sleeping in lighter pants that allow air circulation. Puffy jackets, essential for daytime warmth, can be problematic in a sleeping bag. The jacket's insulation compresses beneath body weight, losing its effectiveness while also compressing the sleeping bag's insulation. The learning happens through trial and cold error. A night spent shivering in too many tight layers teaches the value of loose fit. A morning of damp socks teaches the importance of dry foot covering. A week of sleeping in the same clothes teaches the necessity of separating daywear from sleepwear when possible. The knowledge accumulates slowly, each night offering small adjustments toward a system that allows the body to maintain enough warmth for enough sleep to survive until spring. And still, on the coldest nights, when temperatures fall into the single digits or below zero, no amount of clothing layering provides adequate warmth in an unheated vehicle. The body can only produce so much heat. Fabric can only trap so much of it. At a certain point, the cold overwhelms the system, and survival requires more than clothing alone. Some nights, the body's heat and insulating layers are not enough. When temperatures drop into ranges that threaten hypothermia, vehicle dwellers face the decision of whether to introduce supplemental heat into an already dangerous equation. The options exist. Each carries risks that must be weighed against the certainty of cold. Propane camping heaters appear in vehicles during the worst cold. Small, portable units designed for tent camping or emergency use produce real heat in a small space. A Mr. Heater Buddy or similar catalytic heater can raise the interior temperature of a car 15 or 20 degrees within an hour. For someone facing a night in sub-zero temperatures, that difference represents the gap between survival and crisis. But combustion in an enclosed space creates carbon monoxide. This odorless, invisible gas kills by displacing oxygen in the blood. The body suffocates from the inside while the person remains unconscious. Deaths from carbon monoxide poisoning in vehicles using combustion heaters are documented and verified. The risk is not theoretical. Those who use propane heaters follow strict protocols learned from community knowledge and survival forums. The heater runs only while the person remains awake and alert. Windows stay cracked to allow fresh air circulation, even though this defeats some of the heating purpose. A battery-powered carbon monoxide detector, tested regularly to ensure it functions, sits within arm's reach. The heater never runs through the night. It warms the space before sleep, raises the core temperature of the person and their bedding, then gets shut off completely before loss of consciousness. The residual warmth carries them through the first hours of night. If they wake later from cold, they may run the heater again briefly, but only while fully awake. Even with precautions, the danger remains. Detectors can fail. Ventilation can prove insufficient. A person exhausted from days of poor sleep might drift off while the heater runs. The vehicle-dwelling community shares stories of close calls and actual deaths, repeated as warnings to anyone considering combustion heat. Electric heating offers a different set of compromises. 12-volt electric blankets designed for vehicle use draw power from the car's battery or from a separate deep-cycle battery system. These produce gentler heat without combustion risk. A heated blanket inside a sleeping bag creates a warm zone around the core body. Some vehicles contain more sophisticated systems, portable power stations that run small electric heaters, or installed house battery systems that can power heating pads through the night. The limitation is power. A car's starting battery cannot run a heated blanket all night without draining to the point where the engine would not start in the morning. A dead battery in freezing temperatures means no heat from running the engine, no ability to drive to warmth or services, and the cost of a jump start or replacement battery that may exceed available resources. Those using electric heat invest in separate battery systems, deep cycle marine batteries, or lithium power stations that isolate the heating draw from the vehicle's starting system. But these cost hundreds of dollars and require careful management of charge levels and draw rates. The vehicle's engine itself becomes a heating source, but an expensive one. Running the engine with the heater on warms the cabin quickly. In extreme cold, this may be the only option that allows sleep, but idling an engine for hours burns fuel. A vehicle that gets 30 miles per gallon while driving might burn a gallon every 1 to 2 hours while idling, depending on engine size and outside temperature. Fuel costs accumulate. A night of running the engine intermittently for heat can consume $5 to $10 in gas, money that might otherwise buy food or contribute to the funds needed to escape vehicle living entirely. Mechanical wear adds hidden costs. Engines are not designed for extended idling in cold weather. Oil circulation changes, carbon buildup increases. A vehicle already under stress from age and hard use degrades faster. But when the alternative is hypothermia, the engine runs anyway. Some create heat without electricity or combustion through careful preparation. Water bottles filled with hot water, heated at a gas station bathroom, a gym, a sympathetic business, and wrapped in cloth, carry warmth into the sleeping bag. A single hot water bottle placed near the core or at the feet extends survivable cold by several degrees. The heat dissipates over 2 or 3 hours, but those hours may be enough to allow the body to fall asleep before the cold becomes unbearable. In the middle of the night, when cold wakes the sleeper, the water bottle sits cold and useless, but the first sleep has happened. Heated rocks or bricks warmed on a camping stove outside the vehicle and brought inside wrapped in towels serve the same purpose. They hold heat longer than water, but present a burn risk if they touch skin or sleeping bag fabric directly. The method is old, pre-industrial, and it still works when nothing else is available. Chemical hand warmers, the disposable packets that activate when shaken, provide small-scale supplemental heat. Placed inside gloves or boots, tucked into a sleeping bag near the core, they produce warmth for 6 to 8 hours. A box of 10 costs a few dollars. Over a winter of nightly use, the expense becomes unsustainable. But on the worst nights, a hand warmer can prevent frostbite to extremities. Each heat source solves one problem while creating another. Propane heats effectively, but risks death. Electric blankets provide safe warmth but drain batteries. Running the engine burns money and shortens the vehicle's life. Hot water bottles and hand warmers offer temporary help, but fade quickly. There is no perfect solution, only a menu of compromises. The decision tree runs through the same calculations each night. How cold will it get? How many hours until dawn? What resources are available? Fuel, battery power, money for supplies. What is the condition of the body going into the night, already exhausted, already chilled, or relatively strong? The answers change daily. The choice must be made anyway. And beneath every choice runs the awareness that these risks exist, because the systems meant to provide shelter have failed. The person weighing carbon monoxide against hypothermia is making a calculation that should not be necessary. The knowledge sits quiet but constant, another weight carried into the cold. As temperatures drop and bodies settle into sleep position, an invisible enemy emerges. This threat comes not from the cold outside, but from the warmth within. Every breath releases moisture. Every square inch of skin perspires, even in freezing air. A single person sleeping through a winter night exhales approximately a litre of water vapour into the confined space of a vehicle. That moisture must go somewhere. In a house that vapour disperses through ventilation systems, through the larger volume of air, through materials designed to absorb and release humidity. In a sealed vehicle, it condenses. The metal roof, perhaps 10 degrees below freezing, meets warm breath and transforms vapour back into liquid. Water droplets form on windows, they gather on the ceiling, they collect on any surface colder than the dew point, which in a freezing vehicle means nearly every surface. This is not merely discomfort, this is the beginning of a dangerous cycle. Wet insulation loses its thermal effectiveness. Air pockets that trap warmth fill with moisture and collapse. The cardboard lining the floor, the foam panels covering windows, the reflectix sheets carefully installed, all become compromised as condensation seeps through. A sleeping bag rated for 0 degrees loses that rating when its synthetic fill becomes damp. The same physics that makes wet clothing dangerous makes wet bedding potentially deadly. Water conducts heat away from the body 25 times faster than dry air. The moisture your own breath creates becomes the mechanism that draws warmth from your core. Morning reveals the extent of the overnight accumulation. Ice crystals coat the windows in fractal patterns. The ceiling drips when the sun finally warms it. Sleeping bags feel clammy in spots where condensation settled. The particular smell of dampness pervades everything. This is the evidence of a single night. Over weeks and months, that moisture works deeper into materials that cannot fully dry between cycles. The breathing itself becomes part of the problem. Each exhale sends a visible cloud of vapour into the cold air. Some vehicle dwellers describe pulling the sleeping bag over their heads to create a warmer breathing zone, only to discover that concentrating breath inside the bag saturates the insulation even faster. Others keep their faces exposed to the frigid air, accepting the discomfort of frozen nose and lips, to prevent moisture build up in their primary source of warmth. The windows tell the story most clearly. On a night that drops to 15 degrees, the interior surface of glass might hover near 20 degrees. Every breath that reaches that surface condenses instantly. By midnight, a thin layer of frost has formed. By 3 in the morning, that frost has thickened to a 1/4 inch. By dawn, the windows are opaque with ice, blocking light, sealing the occupant into a dim space where the only way to see outside requires scraping the frost from within. This interior ice formation serves one small mercy. It indicates where moisture is going. Better on the windows than soaking into clothing or bedding. But the morning ritual of wiping or scraping that frost away before it melts and drips creates another problem. The towel or cloth used to remove condensation becomes saturated. Where does it go? In a house, you hang it to dry. In a vehicle with no heat source, that wet towel stays wet, adding to the overall moisture load that must be managed. Metal surfaces conduct cold more efficiently than glass. The roof and frame rails become the coldest points in the vehicle's interior. Condensation forms there first and persists longest. Some vehicle dwellers report touching the ceiling in the morning and finding their fingers stick momentarily to frost. Others describe the specific sound of ice crackling when they shift position and press against an insulated but still frozen wall panel. The moisture comes from more than breathing. The human body releases water vapor through skin in a process called insensible perspiration, distinct from active sweating. Even lying perfectly still in freezing temperatures, the body exhales moisture through millions of pores. Add the vapor from breath, and the numbers become significant. Medical literature confirms that a person at rest releases roughly 40 grams of water per hour through breathing and another 10 through skin. Over 8 hours, that approaches the litre per night figure that vehicle dwellers observe through the physical evidence of condensation. Temperature differentials drive the physics. The warm air near the body, heated by metabolism, can hold more moisture than cold air. As that warm air moves away from the body and contacts cold surfaces, it cools. Cool air holds less moisture. The excess condenses. This is not a flaw in technique. This is thermodynamics operating according to fixed principles. The only variables are how much moisture enters the air, how cold the surfaces are, and how much ventilation exists to remove vapor before it condenses. And here the central paradox emerges. The same sealed environment that preserves heat also traps moisture. Opening a window releases moisture, but invites cold. The balance between these competing needs defines much of the nightly strategy for survival in a freezing vehicle. Managing condensation requires cracking windows to allow moisture escape. This creates an immediate contradiction. The cold outside must be invited in to prevent the moisture inside from becoming dangerous. The calculation involves no perfect answer, only a negotiated compromise repeated every night with different temperatures and different moisture loads. The strategy most commonly employed involves opening windows on opposite sides of the vehicle by a 1/4 inch or less. Not enough to create an obvious gap that might draw attention, not enough to allow precipitation in. Just enough to establish gentle cross-ventilation that pulls moist air out while drawing fresh air in. This exchange happens slowly, ideally without creating a draft across the sleeping area that would make the cold intolerable. The choice of which windows to crack depends on wind direction, parking position, and the layout of the sleeping space. If wind comes from the west, cracking the east windows creates negative pressure that draws air through the vehicle without blasting cold wind directly inside. If the sleeping platform occupies the rear of the vehicle, cracking front windows keeps the air movement away from the insulated sleeping zone. These are decisions made in darkness, based on feel and experience, adjusted throughout the night as conditions change. Some discover that cracking windows equally on all sides creates better circulation than opening one or two wider. Others find that a single small gap on the downwind side provides sufficient air exchange without excessive heat loss. There is no universal formula because vehicles differ, temperature conditions vary, and individual tolerance for cold versus dampness creates different thresholds. The draft itself becomes perceptible, not a wind, but a movement of air detected by exposed skin, a cold current flowing across the face, a slight chill reaching inside the sleeping bag's opening. Enough air movement to prevent the warm, moist cocoon from becoming a condensation chamber, but not so much that maintaining core temperature becomes impossible. Finding that balance requires constant minor adjustments through the night. Battery-powered fans offer another approach, a small USB fan powered by a portable battery bank can circulate air throughout the vehicle interior without requiring engine operation. This circulation prevents moist air from settling and condensing on the coldest surfaces. The moving air distributes heat more evenly and carries moisture toward the cracked windows where it can escape. The battery cost is minimal. A small fan draws perhaps 5 watts, but represents another device to charge, another element to maintain, another potential failure point in the system. The sound of these fans becomes part of the night, not loud, but present, a gentle hum that masks some exterior noise while adding its own constant background. Some find the white noise soothing, others find it intrusive. Either way, the decision comes down to whether the condensation reduction justifies the minor electricity use and the auditory presence. Ventilation carries risks beyond simple cold. In urban parking situations, cracked windows might allow sound to escape, making the presence of a person inside more detectable. In regions where vehicle dwelling is actively discouraged, any sign of habitation invites unwanted attention. The same window gap that prevents dangerous condensation might reveal the soft sounds of movement, breathing, or shifting position that signal occupation. Security concerns also influence ventilation choices. A cracked window provides a potential entry point, however small. While a 1/4-inch gap allows no realistic intrusion risk, the psychological effect of creating any opening in the sealed shelter affects sleep quality for those already hyper-vigilant about safety. The calculation becomes condensation danger versus perceived security compromise. Temperature extremes force harder choices. When exterior temperatures drop below 10 degrees, the cold pouring through even minimal window cracks can overwhelm the body's heat production. When temperatures hover just below freezing, condensation forms readily, but the cold outside is less immediately dangerous. The colder the night, the more difficult the ventilation balance becomes. Breathing direction represents a smaller but still relevant consideration. Some vehicle dwellers deliberately position themselves to breathe toward cracked windows, creating a direct pathway for the most moisture-laden air to escape. Others find this means breathing the coldest air in the vehicle all night. The compromise involves breathing into a small gap in the sleeping bag that vents upward, allowing moisture to rise and disperse rather than condensing immediately on nearby surfaces. Moisture absorbers provide passive assistance. Desiccant materials, silica gel packets, calcium chloride containers, even clay-based cat litter in breathable bags can capture some ambient moisture before it condenses. These materials work slowly and have limited capacity, but over the course of a night, they might absorb enough water vapor to reduce ice buildup slightly. The difference is marginal, not transformative, But every small reduction in condensation means less dampness in insulation and bedding. The practical reality is that condensation cannot be eliminated, only managed. Even with optimal ventilation, some moisture will condense. Even with desiccants and air circulation, ice will form on the coldest surfaces. The goal becomes preventing that condensation from accumulating in the materials that provide warmth and preventing the cycle where wet insulation leads to colder sleeping conditions, which leads to more condensation, which leads to wetter insulation. Morning often reveals whether the previous night's ventilation strategy succeeded. If bedding feels dry and windows show minimal frost, the balance worked. If the sleeping bag's exterior feels damp or frost coats every surface thickly, adjustments are needed for the next night. This ongoing calibration, repeated through experience and observation, represents the practical knowledge that keeps condensation at survivable levels rather than dangerous ones. The paradox remains unresolved. Seal the vehicle against cold and trap moisture, open the vehicle for ventilation and lose heat. Between these poles, vehicle dwellers find the narrow range where both threats remain manageable, but neither is eliminated. This is the negotiation that continues from sunset until dawn, every winter night, in every freezing vehicle where someone attempts to sleep. Moisture absorbers, strategic window wiping, elevated sleeping, platforms and careful breathing direction all form part of the defensive strategy against dampness. Morning often reveals the extent of overnight condensation through ice patterns on windows and wetness in unexpected places. Small containers of damp rid sit wedged into cup holders or tucked into door pockets. These moisture absorbers pull water from the air through chemical desiccation, their white crystals slowly liquefying as they collect what would otherwise coat windows and fabric. Silica gel packets salvaged from shoeboxes or electronics packaging serve the same purpose on a smaller scale. Some use rise in open containers, positioned near the sleeping area where breath moisture concentrates most heavily. The absorbers cannot eliminate condensation, they reduce it. They create a margin. Every morning begins with the same ritual, wiping down condensation before it freezes into ice or soaks into fabric. A dedicated towel moves systematically across each window surface, collecting the night's accumulation. The towel grows heavy with water. By the time all windows are wiped, moisture drips from the cloth. This towel must then be wrung out and stored in a way that allows some drying during the day, though complete drying rarely occurs in winter conditions. Those who skip this morning routine discover its importance quickly. Condensation left to freeze creates ice layers that build night after night, eventually becoming thick enough to reduce visibility and insulate windows in reverse, making them even colder. Ice must be scraped rather than wiped, creating more work and more moisture. Condensation left to drip pools in unexpected places, door seals, dashboard seams, the channels around windows. Over time, this standing moisture creates mold. The sleeping platform itself becomes part of the moisture management system. Sleeping directly on a vehicle's floor or on seats means resting in the coldest zone where dense air settles and condensation migrates. An elevated platform, constructed from storage bins topped with plywood or built from lumber specifically for this purpose, creates space beneath the sleeping surface where cold air can pool without contact with the body. This air gap matters more than the elevation itself. The dead air space provides insulation from the cold metal or plastic below. It separates the sleeper from the lowest, dampest layer of the vehicle's interior atmosphere. Some platform designs incorporate ventilation holes or gaps that allow air circulation beneath the sleeping area, preventing moisture accumulation in the space between platform and floor. The platform introduces new complications. It requires storage space when the vehicle must function as transportation during the day. It reduces already limited headroom, but those who sleep on platforms consistently report staying warmer and drier than those who sleep on seats or floor. Breathing creates more moisture than any other single source during the night. Each exhalation carries water vapor from the lungs and respiratory system. In warm conditions, this moisture dissipates unnoticed. In a cold, sealed vehicle, it immediately condenses on the nearest cold surface. For someone sleeping in a mummy-style sleeping bag with only their face exposed, that nearest cold surface is often the bag's hood or the window directly beside the head. Some vehicle dwellers create what they call a breathing hole or breathing tunnel in their sleeping arrangements. Rather than exhaling directly into the sleeping bag or into the enclosed air of the vehicle cabin, they position an opening that allows breath to escape toward a cracked window. This might be a gap left in window coverings aligned with the sleeping position or a deliberate orientation of the sleeping bag so the face points toward ventilation. Others sleep with their head partially outside the sleeping bag, accepting the discomfort of cold air on their face in exchange for directing moisture away from their insulation. The balance shifts through the night. As temperatures drop toward dawn, the breathing hole often gets closed or the head withdrawn deeper into the bag, prioritizing warmth over moisture control. Morning reveals the night's moisture in unexpected places. Frost patterns on windows show where breath concentrated, where warm air rose and met cold glass. The patterns are beautiful and diagnostic. Heavy frost near the sleeping position indicates too little ventilation or too much moisture production. Clear patches show where air circulation or window cracks prevented condensation from freezing. Ice forms on metal surfaces, door handles, window cranks, exposed frame components. Touch a metal surface in the morning, and skin sometimes sticks briefly to frost. The sleeping bag's outer shell may be stiff with frost where it contacted cold windows or walls during the night. Shake the bag and ice crystals fall like snow. Clothing stored near the sleeping area often feels damp in the morning, even if it was dry the night before. The vehicle's interior humidity rises through the night despite ventilation. Fabrics absorb this moisture. The dampness might not be obvious to touch, but wearing the clothing reveals it. A clammy feeling against skin, a subtle weight, a cooling effect that comes from water content rather than temperature alone. The wet clothes problem operates on a cruel timeline. Daytime weather determines nighttime conditions. Rain or snow soaking clothing and boots during the day creates a situation with no good solution by evening. Wet fabric cannot be fully dried overnight in a freezing vehicle. Running the engine for heat long enough to dry clothes consumes fuel and risks drawing attention. Wearing wet clothes to sleep means spending the night in contact with moisture that will draw heat from the body through continuous evaporation. The most common adaptation is maintaining completely separate sleep clothes. One set of clothing stays sealed in a dry bag or plastic container and is worn only inside the sleeping bag. This clothing may be minimal, thermal underwear, dry socks, a clean shirt, but its dryness is protected absolutely. Damp daywear gets sealed in its own bag to prevent moisture from spreading to other belongings. The morning reversal of this process is simply endured. Putting on cold, damp clothing after a night in dry sleep clothes feels punishing. The body's warmth begins evaporating moisture immediately. Energy that could maintain core temperature goes to heating damp fabric and turning liquid water to vapor. Boots present a particular cruelty. Boots wet from snow or rain will freeze solid overnight in an unheated vehicle. Frozen boots cannot be worn. Some sleep with boots wrapped in spare clothing or even inside the sleeping bag near their feet, using body heat to prevent freezing. The moisture and cold near the feet make sleep more difficult. The alternative, dealing with frozen boots in the morning, makes the day's beginning nearly impossible. A few manage to carry a second pair of boots, keeping one pair for walking through winter weather and one pair dry for emergencies. This requires space most do not have, and expense most cannot manage. The condensation problem has no complete solution, only management, only constant small actions that slightly reduce the wetness, slightly increase the chance of staying dry enough to stay warm enough to sleep. The particular challenge of wet clothes and frozen boots demonstrates how daytime weather creates nighttime problems with no good solutions. Dedicated sleep clothing and sealed storage bags represent small adaptations that prevent moisture from spreading through limited space. The separation of clothing into categories, day clothes and sleep clothes, happens early in the learning curve of vehicle dwelling. The first few nights of sleeping in whatever was worn during the day teach the lesson clearly. Clothing accumulates moisture through the day, even without obvious wetness. Perspiration from walking, humidity from rain or snow in the air. The dampness collected from sitting in a cold vehicle during the day where condensation settles on seats. By night, this accumulated moisture contacts warm skin inside a sleeping bag and evaporation begins. The cooling effect is constant. Sleep becomes difficult. The temptation to add more layers fights against the knowledge that damp layers insulate poorly. Morning arrives with clothing that feels no drier and a body that never fully warmed. Dedicated sleep clothing changes the equation. These garments are worn only inside the sleeping bag. They are stored in sealed plastic bags or waterproof stuff sacks between uses, protecting them from the vehicle's ambient humidity. The act of changing clothes before sleep becomes a ritual that marks the transition from day to night, from movement to stillness. The sleep clothes themselves are chosen for specific properties. Thermal underwear made from synthetic fabrics that wick moisture rather than absorbing it. Loose-fitting layers that allow air circulation rather than compression. Clean fabric, because the oils and dirt accumulated during the day reduce insulation effectiveness and increase moisture absorption. Dry socks matter more than almost anything else. Feet remain the extremities most vulnerable to cold during sleep. Damp socks in a sleeping bag mean cold feet through the night, which often means no sustained sleep. Some carry multiple pairs of sleep socks, changing them if the first pair becomes damp from perspiration during the night. The day wear that has been removed gets sealed immediately. Large Ziploc bags work for socks, and smaller items, heavy-duty garbage bags or dry bags contain outer layers and pants. The sealing serves two purposes. It prevents moisture from the day clothes from spreading to other belongings, and it contains any odour that builds when clothing cannot be washed regularly. These sealed bags of damp clothing sit somewhere in the vehicle through the night. They do not dry. In below freezing temperatures they may partially freeze. Morning means opening the bag and confronting cold, damp fabric that must be put on anyway. Some develop a morning technique of placing day clothes under their body for the last 30 minutes before getting up, using body heat to slightly warm the fabric. This makes the transition marginally less shocking. Others dress as quickly as possible, accepting the discomfort and knowing that movement will eventually generate enough heat to stop shivering. The boot problem operates on a different scale of difficulty. Boots that have been walked through snow, slush, or winter rain are thoroughly wet by evening. Leather or fabric absorbs water. The insides become damp from perspiration. No amount of wiping or stuffing with newspaper will fully dry boots overnight in freezing conditions. If left on the floor of the vehicle, boots freeze solid. Ice forms in the fabric. The structure becomes rigid. Getting a foot into a frozen boot is possible but painful, and the foot immediately begins to freeze from contact with ice-saturated material. Frostbite risk is real. The practice of sleeping with boots in the sleeping bag emerged from necessity. Boots wrapped in a spare shirt or towel and placed near the feet, inside the bag but not touching skin, stay warm enough to prevent freezing. The moisture and the mass of the boots create cold spots in the sleeping bag. The person sleeps less well. But morning offers boots that can be worn. Some elaborate on this method by placing boots inside a plastic bag before bringing them into the sleeping bag, containing any moisture and mud. Others use chemical heat packs placed inside the boots overnight, though this requires purchasing heat packs regularly and offers variable results. A rare few manage to maintain two complete sets of footwear, wet weather boots for daytime and dry insulated boots or heavy socks for sleeping and emergencies. This requires trunk space that is often devoted to other survival necessities. It requires resources to purchase and maintain two sets of winter footwear. Most choose one pair of boots and manage their freezing as best they can. The moisture spreading problem extends beyond clothing. Sleeping bags themselves accumulate moisture over multiple nights. Body perspiration, breath condensation, contact with damp windows or walls all contribute water to the bag's insulation. Down insulation is particularly vulnerable, clumping when wet and losing all insulating value. Synthetic insulation performs better when damp, but still degrades with moisture accumulation. There is no practical way to fully dry a sleeping bag during winter vehicle dwelling. Hanging it in sunlight during the day helps if the day is sunny. If there is time, if there is a safe place to leave the vehicle with items hanging from it. Turning the bag inside out, shaking frost and condensation from the shell, airing it open during the day, these actions reduce moisture, but do not eliminate it. Over the course of a winter, sleeping bags become progressively damper and less effective. This is known. This is expected. Some vehicle dwellers budget for replacing a sleeping bag midwinter, knowing that moisture damage will eventually make it inadequate. Others simply endure the degrading warmth, adding more clothing layers as the bag's effectiveness diminishes. Sealed storage becomes the organizing principle for anything that must stay dry. Documents and identification go in Ziploc bags inside larger waterproof bags. Electronics are protected similarly. Extra clothing, especially backup sleep clothes or dry socks, are stored in sealed containers. Food that might be affected by humidity goes in plastic bins with tight lids. The vehicle's interior becomes mapped into zones, wet zones and dry zones. Certain areas are accepted as places where moisture will accumulate: the floor, the area around windows, the rear cargo area where wet daywear is stored. Other areas are defended as dry zones: the elevated sleeping platform, the sealed containers of backup supplies, the protected space where critical documents live. Maintaining this separation requires constant attention. A wet jacket tossed carelessly on a dry bag can transfer moisture. Boots placed too close to stored clothing can create damp spots. The fatigue and cold that make careful organisation difficult are the same conditions that make it most necessary. The moisture creeps, it spreads, it finds fabric and cardboard and paper. Managing it is not a single action, but an ongoing practice, a daily and nightly routine of wiping, sealing, separating, protecting. The small dry spaces that survive inside a cold, damp vehicle represent continuous effort against physics and weather. True, restful sleep does not arrive in a freezing vehicle. This is not because warmth cannot be achieved. It is because the body itself works against rest. The cycle begins as sleep deepens, metabolism slows. This is normal. This happens in every sleeping person, but in a warm bed, it does not matter. In a cold vehicle, it creates a problem with no solution. As metabolism slows, body temperature drops. The drop triggers a response. The body wakes itself. 2 hours, sometimes 3. This is the pattern described by those who sleep in vehicles through winter. Not one continuous night of rest, but segments. Brief periods of sleep, followed by waking. The waking comes with cold feet, numb fingers, a chill that has worked its way through layers despite careful preparation. Each time adjustments must be made. The sleeping bag gets pulled tighter, an extra layer goes on, a hand gets tucked deeper into warmth, blood flow gets restored through deliberate movement. Then the attempt to return to sleep begins again. The sleeping bag holds heat well enough when the body produces it. But the body produces less heat while sleeping. The equation changes every few hours. What felt warm at midnight feels inadequate by 3. What worked at 3 fails by 5. Some keep extra layers within reach, a jacket draped nearby, socks ready. A hat positioned for easy access in darkness, the reaching out into cold air, the brief exposure, the quick addition of insulation, then the long wait for warmth to return before sleep might follow. The mind does not help. Hyper-awareness becomes involuntary in this context. Every sound registers: footsteps on pavement outside, a car door closing 3 spaces away. An engine starting, the particular rhythm of a security patrol or police vehicle moving slowly through the lot. These sounds might mean nothing, they might mean everything. The calculation happens automatically, even half asleep. Is that someone walking past? Are they stopping? Is that engine sound getting closer or farther away? The questions prevent the descent into deep sleep. Safety concerns operate beneath conscious thought after enough nights. The part of the mind that monitors surroundings never fully disengages. This vigilance serves a purpose, but it extracts a cost. The deep sleep cycles where true rest occurs remain inaccessible. 3 in the morning brings its own particular weight. This is documented. This is when cold feels coldest, when isolation feels most complete, when the night seems longest. The hours before dawn stretch. Time moves differently in darkness, in cold, in the space between waking and sleeping. That becomes the default state. By 5 or 6 comes the coldest period. Outside, temperature reaches its low point. Inside the vehicle, hours of breath and body heat have created moisture that has frozen on windows, drawn warmth from air, settled into fabric. This is when even good preparation feels insufficient. Some remain still, preserving what warmth exists in the sleeping bag. Others move, generating heat through muscle, activity, knowing that immobility leads to deeper cold. Neither choice feels correct. Both represent adaptation to circumstances with no good options. The body needs sleep. The cold prevents it. The mind needs rest. The environment prevents it. This tension sustains itself through the entire night. Not crisis, not emergency, just the steady accumulation of insufficient sleep, of interrupted rest, of the gap between what the body requires and what conditions allow. Morning comes not because rest is complete, but because dawn arrives, the night ends. But the tiredness does not. The need to urinate arrives sometime in the cold hours. This is predictable. This happens every night. But the problem it creates has no comfortable solution. Inside the sleeping bag exists warmth built over hours, not heat, not comfort, but enough warmth to allow something resembling rest. Outside the sleeping bag waits freezing air. The difference between these two states is extreme. The calculation begins. Can this be endured until morning? How many hours remain? Is the discomfort manageable or approaching urgency? The answers determine what happens next. Leaving the sleeping bag means losing all accumulated warmth. The air inside the vehicle hovers near outside temperature. 10 degrees, 20 if the body heat and insulation have helped. Cold enough that the transition feels brutal. First the zipper, cold air enters the bag immediately, then emergence. Layers that felt adequate while lying down feel thin while sitting up. The feet that were almost warm go numb within seconds on the cold floor. Finding facilities requires leaving the vehicle entirely. This means dressing enough to go outside, shoes, jacket, walking across a parking lot or through streets to wherever public bathrooms might be accessible at this hour. Gas stations, some close overnight, fast food restaurants, many lock facilities or restrict access, 24-hour stores, if any exist nearby. The walk happens in genuine cold. The bathroom, if found, offers fluorescent light and mirrors that show exactly what this life looks like. Then the walk back. The vehicle, when re-entered, feels even colder than before because the body was briefly warmer inside the bathroom. Returning to the sleeping bag means starting over. The bag is no longer warm, it is cold. The process of generating heat begins again. Shivering. Tension, the long wait for the body to re-warm the space. An hour, maybe more, before sleep becomes possible again. If it becomes possible. Some adapt differently. Wide-mouth bottles serve a purpose here. This is documented in accounts. This is mentioned in guides written by those with experience. Undignified, but practical. It solves the immediate problem without requiring the exit into cold. The bottle stays within reach. The process happens without leaving the sleeping bag. The cold air stays outside. The warmth, such as it is, remains preserved. In morning, the bottle must be emptied and cleaned. But morning will require leaving the sleeping bag anyway. Others endure the discomfort. This is not stubbornness. This is calculation. How much warmth will be lost versus how much discomfort can be tolerated. Sometimes the discomfort wins. Sometimes the desire to preserve warmth outweighs physical need, until dawn makes departure necessary regardless. For women, the bottle solution works less easily. Anatomy creates complications. Some use other containers, some develop other methods, some simply face the cold exit as inevitable and plan for it. The dignity cost exists regardless of method. This is not how anyone imagines living. This is not what nighttime routines should involve. But this is what freezing vehicle sleep requires. Constant negotiation between basic human needs and the reality of cold. No solution feels adequate. The bottle preserves warmth but requires storage and cleaning in tight space with limited water access. The exit preserves dignity but destroys the fragile warmth that took hours to build. The endurance preserves both but creates physical discomfort that prevents rest. The choice gets made every night, sometimes multiple times per night. Just one more calculation in the long chain of calculations that constitutes survival in a vehicle through winter. Just one more reminder that the simple acts taken for granted in housed life become complex problems without walls and plumbing and heat. Dawn often comes with bathroom urgency as the primary motivator for leaving the sleeping bag, not because rest is complete, not because the body is ready, but because the need finally outweighs all other considerations. The night ends. The day begins. The next night will bring the same dilemma again. Sleeping positions shift throughout the night as the balance between heat conservation and circulation changes. The fetal position preserves warmth but restricts blood flow. Horizontal positions feel warmer, but require better floor insulation. Even the choice between seat and floor space involves thermal calculations. The body curls instinctively when cold, knees drawn up, arms tucked close, head lowered toward chest. This position minimizes surface area exposed to cold air, creating the smallest possible target for heat loss. The fetal curl is ancient physiology, the same shape sought in sleep by mammals across species when temperatures drop. But the position carries a cost. Compressed limbs mean restricted circulation. Blood flow to hands and feet diminishes when joints remain bent for extended periods. The extremities that most need warmth receive less of it. After an hour or two in tight fetal position, many wake with numb fingers or feet that tingle painfully as circulation returns. The warming itself becomes uncomfortable, a prickling burn that forces movement. Some shift then to a more extended position, lying flat, legs straight, arms at sides. This horizontal arrangement feels counterintuitive in cold, more body surface contacts, cold air, but with proper floor insulation beneath, it often provides better overall warmth. Blood flows more freely to extremities when limbs straighten. The sensation of cold may initially intensify, but sustained warmth frequently follows as circulation improves. The choice between seat and floor involves its own thermal mathematics. Reclining in the driver's or passenger seat keeps the body elevated above the coldest air layer that settles near the floor. The seat cushion provides some insulation. The position feels familiar, less like camping and more like simply resting in a normal place. But seats present problems. The angled position never quite achieves horizontal comfort. Pressure points develop at hips and shoulders. The gap between seat back and cushion creates a cold zone at the lower back. Legs dangle or must be propped awkwardly. Sleep comes in shorter intervals, interrupted by the need to shift away from discomfort. The floor, when properly insulated, offers different advantages. A sleeping pad or layered blankets create a flat surface. The body can stretch fully. With sufficient material beneath, cardboard, then foam, then sleeping pad, the colder the metal floor stays distant. Some build elaborate platforms that span from back seat to front, creating a level sleeping surface where none existed in the vehicle's original design. These platforms require evening assembly and morning disassembly. Seat backs fold down. Plywood boards or fitted cushions bridge the remaining gaps. The construction becomes routine, a nightly ritual that marks the transition from vehicle to bedroom. The platform elevates the sleeper above the coldest air, while providing the flat surface that deeper sleep requires. But movement remains necessary regardless of position. No single arrangement sustains comfort through an entire freezing night. The body's contact points grow cold, where pressure prevents circulation. A hip pressed against padding for an hour begins to ache with cold that radiates into the bone. A shoulder bearing weight develops the same deep chill. So, sleepers turn, roll from one side to the other, shift from back to side, extend cramped legs, then curl them again when cold air finds the newly exposed surface. Each movement disturbs the warm microclimate laboriously created within the sleeping bag. Cold air rushes in through the opening at the neck. Minutes pass before warmth rebuilds. The visible breath clouds inside the vehicle mark each position change. Exhaled moisture catches what little light enters through covered windows, the distant orange glow of streetlights, the pale wash of moonlight, the occasional sweep of headlights from passing cars. The clouds hang briefly in the cold air before dissipating, a visible reminder of the temperature that surrounds the small warm zone of the sleeping bag. This periodic movement, this constant positional adjustment, prevents the deep, sustained sleep that cold-stressed bodies desperately need. True rest requires stillness, requires the body to settle into sleep's deeper stages without interruption. But cold and discomfort allow only lighter sleep, punctuated by these necessary shifts. Some learn their own patterns through repeated nights, knowing that left-side sleeping lasts perhaps 90 minutes before the hip grows too cold, that back-lying works for an hour before lower back stiffness demands a change, that the fetal position provides warmth for a short while before circulation problems force extension. This knowledge doesn't prevent the discomfort, but it removes surprise. The waking to adjust position becomes expected rather than frustrating. The night divides into predictable segments rather than feeling like continuous failure to achieve rest. Every sound becomes amplified in the quiet darkness. Footsteps on pavement, car doors closing, engines starting nearby, the particular rhythm of security or police patrols. Hypervigilance necessary for safety prevents the deep sleep that cold, stressed bodies desperately need. The night is not silent. This becomes clear within the first hour of attempting sleep. Sounds that daytime activity would mask grow sharp and distinct in the darkness. Footsteps approach from a distance, their rhythm and weight creating a narrative. Fast steps suggest someone in a hurry, likely no threat. Slow, irregular steps might mean intoxication, unpredictability. Steps that pause near the vehicle demand full attention. Car doors closing carry particular meaning. The sound identifies proximity, the solid thunk of a door 3 spaces away versus the closer, louder slam of the vehicle directly adjacent. Each closure prompts the same question: who has arrived and why? Most prove innocuous, someone finishing a late shift, returning to their own vehicle, departing without interest in their surroundings. But some require vigilance, doors that open and close repeatedly, voices in conversation nearby. Activity that suggests more than simple arrival or departure. The calculus of threat assessment happens automatically, unconsciously, dozens of times each night. Engines starting create their own information. The sound places the vehicle. That sedan 2 rows over, the truck at the lot's far end. The running engine might indicate someone leaving, a problem solving itself. Or it might mean someone arrived, parked, and now sits with the motor idling. Purpose unknown, intentions unclear. Some engines idle for hours, a semi-truck driver sleeping in the cab with the motor running for heat. Another person in another vehicle facing the same cold night, choosing to burn fuel rather than endure the temperatures that follow when the engine stops. The sound becomes almost companionable, a reminder of shared circumstance. But other idling engines signal different activity. Cars that arrive after midnight and sit running in patterns that suggest waiting rather than sleeping. These draw attention from security patrols and police, attention that might extend to nearby vehicles even when those occupants seek only to sleep unnoticed. The particular rhythm of security patrols becomes recognizable. The slow roll through parking areas at regular intervals, the spotlight that occasionally sweeps across rows of vehicles. Most private security guards ignore obviously occupied cars as long as they appear orderly and stationary. Their job involves preventing crime and disturbance, not rousing people from sleep. But recognition doesn't eliminate the spike of alertness each time the patrol vehicle approaches. The listening for whether the engine slows near your position. The attention to whether the spotlight lingers on your windows. The relief when the patrol continues past without stopping. Police patrols create greater tension. The authority to demand identification, to run license plates, to require someone to move even when no law has been broken. Most encounters end without incident, a knock on the window, a brief conversation, sometimes a warning to move by morning, occasionally nothing more than a silent departure after seeing someone is simply sleeping. But the possibility of a different outcome prevents rest. The fear that this interaction might escalate, that outstanding warrants, expired registration, or simple officer discretion might transform a survival strategy into a legal problem. That possessions might be searched, that the vehicle might be impounded, that the thin margin of stability might collapse entirely. So sounds that others might sleep through trigger full wakefulness. The instinct for safety overrides the body's need for rest. Each car door, each approaching footstep, each slowing engine might mean nothing or might mean everything. The only way to know is to wake enough to assess. Some attempt to create acoustic buffers. Earplugs block some sound, allowing longer periods of sleep between disturbances. White noise from a phone, rain sounds, ocean waves, ambient music masks individual noises beneath a constant audio blanket. But these solutions create their own danger. Reduced hearing means reduced awareness. The footsteps that stop directly outside might go unnoticed. The knock on the window might startle rather than wake gradually. The balance between rest and safety remains imperfect, each night a negotiation between competing needs. The peculiar silence of very cold nights adds its own quality. Sound carries differently in frigid air. Voices from a distance arrive with unusual clarity. The crack of ice underfoot, the scrape of a shovel on pavement, the metallic ping of expanding and contracting metal, all these sounds travel through cold air with a sharpness that warmer nights muffle. This acoustic clarity means privacy erodes. Conversations inside the vehicle might be audible to anyone passing nearby. A cough, a sneeze, the rustle of movement in a sleeping bag, all these sounds announce presence to the surrounding darkness. So many learn a particular stillness. Moving quietly becomes habit. Necessary activities happen with deliberate care to minimize noise. The goal isn't complete silence, that's impossible, but rather avoiding sounds that draw attention or disturb the uneasy peace of shared parking areas where multiple people pursue the same strategy of invisible survival. The hypervigilance itself becomes exhausting. The constant low-level alertness, even during sleep, prevents the deep restorative rest that actually renews the body and mind. Sleep studies document that perceived safety directly affects sleep quality. When the sleeping environment feels uncertain or potentially dangerous, the brain maintains a monitoring function even during sleep, processing sounds and preparing to wake fully if threat appears. This means that even on nights when nothing actually happens, when no real danger materializes, the body remains partially on guard. The night passes in lighter sleep stages. Morning arrives with the hours technically spent sleeping, but without the restoration those hours should have provided. Cold itself impairs thinking. This is not discomfort or distraction. This is measurable cognitive decline that begins when body temperature drops even slightly below normal operating range. The brain, working to maintain core warmth, diverts resources from higher functions. Decision-making slows, coordination falters, memory becomes unreliable. The effect compounds with each hour of inadequate sleep. A person who has spent one night sleeping in interrupted segments in a freezing car wakes sluggish, their reflexes delayed, their thoughts moving through thick resistance. A person who has spent 10 such nights, 20, an entire winter season, they carry exhaustion that no morning coffee addresses. Chronic sleep deprivation becomes the baseline condition. Morning brings documented difficulty with basic tasks. Fingers that spent the night curled tight inside gloves struggle with fine motor control. The simple act of unlacing frozen boots, of manipulating a zipper, of counting out correct change, these require concentration that should be automatic. Alertness arrives slowly, if at all. The body remembers what the conscious mind tries to forget. Muscles remain partially tensed even after waking, held in the protective curl that preserved warmth through darkness. Shoulders ache from hours of unconscious bracing. Backs stiffen from sleeping on surfaces never designed for rest. The physical residue of survival posture persists into daylight hours. Night after night, the deficit accumulates. Sleep that never deepens fully, that breaks apart every 2 or 3 hours, that occurs in a state of partial alertness. This creates debt that cannot be repaid with occasional better rest. The exhaustion becomes structural. It affects employment for those trying to maintain jobs. It affects health management for those with chronic conditions requiring consistent sleep. It affects everything that depends on the brain and body functioning within normal parameters. The psychological weight adds its own burden. Each night brings the same calculations, the same cold, the same vigilance. The anticipation begins in afternoon, a low dread of the coming darkness that must be managed alongside whatever else the day demands. There is no night off, there is no sleeping late to recover. The cold returns with mechanical regularity, and the body must be ready. Some speak of a particular fog that settles over thinking after weeks of winter vehicle sleep. Not confusion exactly, but a dulling of sharpness, a distance from full engagement with the world. Conversations require extra effort to follow. Simple problems that should resolve quickly circle in the mind without landing on solutions. The cold doesn't only steal sleep. It steals the mental clarity that makes navigating difficult circumstances possible. Dawn arrives with a paradox. The temperature drops to its lowest point just as the sky begins to lighten. The coldest moment of the 24-hour cycle typically occurs between 5 and 6 in the morning, when overnight heat loss reaches maximum and the sun has not yet begun its warming work. This is when bodies curled in sleeping bags feel the cold most acutely, when breath clouds thickest in the dim interior, when the urge to start the engine becomes nearly overwhelming. But fuel costs. Mechanical wear accumulates, noise draws attention in the early quiet. So many wait. They remain in whatever sleeping arrangement got them through the night, bag cinched tight, layers adjusted one final time, watching the light change through covered windows or the small gaps where condensation has frozen into frost patterns. The light quality itself signals the transition. It enters the vehicle transformed by whatever covers the windows, by the ice crystals coating the glass, by the particular angle of winter sun. Grey first, then gaining definition. Shadows within the vehicle begin to separate into distinct shapes. The sleeping bag that was only a felt presence in darkness becomes visible as fabric and stitching. Breath clouds become visible rather than just sensed. Frost on the interior windows catches the early light. It forms in patterns determined by temperature gradients, by moisture concentrations, by the specific geometry of each window. Spirals and ferns and geometric arrays, beautiful if they weren't also evidence of how much moisture the night air held, how cold the glass surface became, how much heat escaped through every barrier raised against it. The defrosting ritual cannot be rushed. Ice scraped too aggressively can crack cold, stressed glass. Some use credit cards or plastic scrapers, working methodically from top to bottom. Others let the ice melt naturally as interior temperature rises, though this means waiting longer and dealing with water running down into door seals and onto already damp surfaces. Condensation that didn't freeze must be managed. Towels or cloths wipe down surfaces, absorbing overnight moisture before it can soak into fabric or cardboard insulation. The same small towel might make this circuit every morning, across the dashboard, along the door seals, across the ceiling fabric, where breath rose during the night. The towel grows heavy with absorbed water. Where to dry it becomes another small problem without obvious solution. The vehicle must transform from bedroom back to transportation. Sleeping bags get compressed and stowed. Layers of clothing removed during night now return to storage locations. The platform or seat arrangement used for sleeping gets broken down or reconfigured. Window coverings come down, restoring visibility. Each step reverses the evening's preparation, converting shelter back into car. Some remain in the sleeping setup until the sun's warmth is genuinely felt, not just seen. The first rays striking the vehicle don't immediately raise interior temperature. That takes time, takes the gradual absorption of solar radiation through glass and metal, but the psychological effect arrives faster. Light means the night has ended. Light means the worst of the cold has passed. Light means survival until morning, one more time. The particular sound of frost crackling reaches ears attuned to the vehicle's vocabulary of noises. It's the sound of ice crystals fracturing as temperature differentials shift, as sun-warmed metal expands slightly, as the rigid geometry of frozen moisture begins to fail. Small sounds, easily missed, but marking the turn from night's grip toward day's reprieve. The morning routine involves defrosting interior windows, managing overnight condensation, reorganizing possessions, and attempting to maintain a presentable appearance despite circumstances. Battery concerns mean running the engine for heat must be balanced against fuel costs and mechanical wear. Dawn brings the coldest temperatures of the entire night cycle. The body has been working for hours to maintain core warmth, burning through calories and energy reserves. Many remain motionless inside their sleeping setup, waiting for the first sunlight to reach the vehicle. This is not laziness. This is calculation. Morning temperatures often reach their lowest point just before the sun rises, and the warmth generated by a sleeping bag or layered blankets represents hours of accumulated body heat that will dissipate within minutes once disturbed. The first task involves the windows. Ice has formed on the interior glass throughout the night, a thin crystalline layer that must be scraped away before visibility returns. This is reversed from the familiar winter ritual of scraping exterior frost. Here, the scraper works from inside, removing ice that formed from human breath and body moisture. The moisture wiped from windows the night before has returned as frost. The vehicle must transform from bedroom back into transportation. Sleeping bags are compressed and stored, blankets are folded, window coverings come down, letting in the grey morning light. Each item returns to its designated location, in a space where organisation determines whether life remains manageable or descends into chaos. Appearance matters. The maintenance of presentable appearance, despite these circumstances, represents both dignity and practical necessity. Those who work must arrive looking employable. Gym memberships provide shower access. Public restrooms become grooming stations. The effort required to maintain the appearance of housed normalcy adds another layer to the morning routine. Night after night of freezing vehicle sleep creates cumulative health impacts, respiratory infections, chronic condition exacerbations, frostbite risk, and hygiene challenges documented by medical outreach workers. The constant uncertainty and isolation exact psychological costs beyond the physical toll. The single cold night presents challenge and discomfort. The second night adds to the first. The third builds on both. By the 10th night, the body carries accumulated debt that rest has not erased. Medical outreach workers document patterns, increased respiratory infections among those sleeping in cold vehicles, exacerbation of chronic conditions like arthritis and asthma, frostbite damage to fingers and toes, skin conditions related to limited hygiene access, sleep debt compounds with each interrupted night. The body never reaches deep restorative sleep stages when it must wake repeatedly to adjust layers, restore circulation, or respond to external sounds. Chronic exhaustion affects decision-making, coordination, and the ability to maintain employment. The mental fog that follows inadequate sleep becomes permanent background noise. Cold itself impairs cognitive function. The sluggishness experienced after a night of freezing, interrupted sleep is not simply tiredness. It represents reduced blood flow to extremities, lowered core temperature, and a brain operating below optimal conditions. Alertness and coordination suffer. Simple tasks require extra effort. Beyond the physical toll, the psychological costs accumulate. The constant uncertainty about safety, the hypervigilance necessary to detect threats, the social isolation that comes from hiding one's circumstances, the erosion of dignity through repeated exposure to situations no human should endure as routine. These stresses leave marks that persist even if housing is eventually secured. The population living in vehicles defies simple categorization. Working individuals, families with children, elderly people on fixed incomes. The stereotype of homelessness, chronic substance use, mental illness, long-term unemployment captures only a fraction of those sleeping in cars through freezing nights. Many maintain jobs, attend school, care for children. They shower at gyms, dress in workplace-appropriate clothing, park in different locations to avoid notice. The crisis they face is not primarily one of employment but of housing affordability, the widening gap between wages and rent that pushes people with incomes into vehicles. This invisible population concentrates in areas where housing costs have outpaced earnings most dramatically. Expensive coastal cities, college towns, tourist destinations. But winter reaches even mild climates, and freezing nights occur wherever these populations exist. The working person sleeping in a sedan returns to an office the next morning. The family in a minivan gets children to school. The retiree in a camper van survives on Social Security, never intended to cover both housing and other necessities. They remain largely unseen because visibility means risk, loss of employment, loss of custody, citations and fines that worsen already precarious situations. Vehicles become shelter instead of traditional housing or emergency shelters for reasons documented by outreach workers and researchers. Shelter capacity falls far short of need in most communities. Restrictions on pets mean choosing between companionship and a bed. Limits on possessions force impossible decisions about what to abandon. Safety concerns, particularly for women and families, make shelters feel more dangerous than vehicles. Policies that separate families or require sobriety create barriers. For many, the vehicle represents autonomy, the last space where personal choice and privacy remain possible. The car often functions as the final asset, the last possession separating someone from absolute destitution. It provides transportation to work, access to services, a locked door. Losing the vehicle means losing employment, means losing any path back to stability. This framework reveals the choice is rarely vehicle versus apartment, but vehicle versus street, vehicle versus tent, vehicle versus complete exposure. The relative safety of 4 metal walls and a locking door, despite the cold, represents the best available option within constrained circumstances. The preparation begins again as daylight fades. The careful arrangement of layers, the window coverings positioned just so, the moisture barriers checked one more time before darkness settles. Each night demands the same quiet expertise, the same patient negotiation with cold and condensation and the limits of what a vehicle can provide. This knowledge passes between those who share this circumstance, traded in parking lots and online forums, refined through winters of trial and necessary adaptation. The methods work because they must. The resilience continues because there is no alternative. Morning will come again, and with it another day of maintaining the ordinary routines that keep a life moving forward, despite the absence of walls and warmth that others take as given. The survival is real. The people enduring it are your neighbours, your co-workers, faces you pass without knowing what the night ahead holds for them.